Hello, everybody, and welcome to the V.A.C. Roundtable number 55. We're very welcome to have Rachel Parmelee. She is a master nurse practitioner, and she, of course, is with the ACNA. And let's see, share page. Yes. And we should be good to go. All right, so everything's going smooth. All right, so thank you, Rachel, for joining us today. How would you like to be addressed?
Rachel's fine. Yeah.
Rachel, that's fine. All right, so with that in mind, we'll start off jumping right in there. So our favorite question to start off to people, and this is a continuing discussion with people who we respect, as well as authorities that we consider in cannabis. And the initial question that we all are curious about is, how'd you initially come to cannabis? How old? Well, there's a couple to this. How old when you first heard of cannabis, and then when did you get involved and why?
So how old? The first time I smelled it was as a young child. I should say that. But in Michigan, it became medical in 2008. So of course, as a nurse, that was when I was first beginning my career. And but the products were very limited, right, to caregivers, which were doing quite well, providing cannabis to their 5 patients, seemed to be, going good until, I didn't really consider the really medical aspect of it until a family member, my grandfather, asked me, because I was the nurse of the family. This was some odd years later. And he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he just came out and asked me. I was driving him to a radiation appointment one day, and he said, "Rachel, what do you think about that marijuana?" Because they watch the news and they were hearing all about it. And I was like, well, I don't know. And he was a veteran, Korean War. And so I really did start with the veterans in mind. And I looked for information about, chemo, radiation. Is there any impact? How do I make sure that this medicine is safe for him? At that point, the regulations for testing were not adequate, I guess. And I just didn't know what was in it, right? I didn't want to cause harm. But I also knew that there was something to it, right? So I searched and searched for information, and I became sort of angry, right? Not knowing anything about it, being a nurse in the medical field and it being considered medical in my state. And I was so beside myself, right? Because I didn't know how to answer these questions. And, patients rely on us to share information with them. So I finally found a Patients at a Time little tiny seminar that was in Traverse City. There's probably maybe 25 attendees, and it was Mary Lynn Mathery. So I was total fangirling her, right? And now we chat on the phone, so it's amazing. But she told me, I know, right? It's amazing. So she said, "Why don't you join the ACNA?" And I said, "Well, okay, don't have anything to lose there. I would love to understand this more." But the real effect of all of that was the process of helping my grandfather get access, the process of seeing the results for myself. And I don't want to get too deep in it, but I always tend to tear up because it's a very emotional, and it was a very emotional event for me that in his final days, he thanked me for helping him do this. And I was like, no, the credit goes to you for at least trying something, that you had never believed in before, didn't think there was any use for it, thought it was, just some drug. So that credit goes to you, but that moment of knowing how much he thought it helped him, or he believed it helped him, he would, reduce his medications. He was able to go to our family vacation within sound mind and body. And that was a transforming moment for me. It was very personal, and it just stays with me. And just knowing that it helped him, and whether I knew on a pharmacological, physiological level, whether it really helped in that aspect or not, who was I to say it didn't? Right? He believed that, so I believed him, and that's really kind of what pushed me into, okay, I got to keep going with this. There's something that other nurses need to know. We need to embrace and support patients in the way that they want our support. It's just why I feel so strongly that healthcare professionals should be aware that other things exist outside the medical model, and they're maybe more effective. We just don't know. But yeah, so that's sort of where I started.
That's very personalized, needless to say, and very brave of you to speak your truth at that time so that he could listen. And blessings on him for being open to that experience, as well as, we as activists that have been doing this for decades. There's transformative moments, and yeah, that's square on the head. So I'm sorry you had to endure that, but I'm thankful that you did, because it started you on this journey, needless to say.
Yes. Yep.
Yes. So I will go to, since you're talking patients out of time, we're actually blessed by having Al Byrne with us as well, who helped start Patients Out of Time. So he has the next question. So Councilmember Byrne, you're recognized.
Well, I'm having trouble here with in and out, and I hope you can hear me. But before I get to my question, Rachel, it was your story. You see, I started that same way with my dad in 1967, and it was all those years ago that I knew I had to do something to bring the cannabis therapeutic value to fruition. I'm sorry, in a sense, that I failed. Shouldn't have had to do that. So,
It's difficult.
My question is, the ACNA, Marilyn and I had a lot to do with that.
Oh yeah.
And I'm wondering, on a professional level, whether or not your organization, you as the leader right now, think that the ACNA is a transitional organization towards the greater educational value of putting it in all the nursing schools and medical schools, et cetera. Or do you think that cannabis is such a unique herb that it needs a professional organization to carry it forward to the future? Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. So I sure hope that the medical, field or regulators don't want to sort of take it over. That's my biggest fear, is that it will be highly regulated in a way that there's no access. My thought was never that cannabis should be taken over by any means. I think patients have known that it works for them for a very long time. What does need to work is for medical professionals to support patients' decisions by openly discussing cannabis use, especially when it comes to other medicines or safe products. And I think, unfortunately, the integration, it sort of goes against what most physicians have been taught. And that's the gold standard clinical trial research is the only way to practice safe medicine. Now, I can't say that for all physicians. For half a century, we had this terrible quality research cannabis, and no wonder right, the evidence wasn't so convincing. And, now that's changed. And I think that these organizations that are truly in it for the right reasons, and that's for the patients and the veterans, right? They could use it the most, and we should have access for them. And you all, right? I think that it will help support the normalization of it, to have these organizations push these initiatives forward in a way that those that are not educated in it can understand. We have to sort of introduce it incrementally. But I can't say that for all physicians. I do believe as we continue this real world evidence, we'll just continue to add value. But I also, like to point out that, cannabis is as helpful as it is not a cure-all, but we should support patients and how they feel. Otherwise we wouldn't, all be here right today to continue this fight and sort of free the plant. We don't want it highly regulated, because that just creates more red tape and issues. I think what we truly need is education, and that's what ACNA is about. As president, that's my number one goal, is educate these nurses that are just coming into the field, or even nurses that have been not as exposed to other modalities that more holistic practitioners understand. And cannabis is just one of those tools that we need to share with the broader population, because it does have so much utility and benefit to all different populations in all different areas of health. So that's what's really interesting, and supporting other professionals that have been taught not to really value this real world evidence, right? It's strategic, right? It's very strategic, and we have to talk in their language, and is sort of why I decided, okay, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to learn how to make these changes on a higher level. I'm going to be at the table. I'm going to influence regulation. So yeah, I think involving organizations, but really, if we could all get together, right, that's really where that big change could happen. But we do still, just as healthcare is very fragmented and separated from each other. And I think that it would really benefit all of us to align in numbers. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Well, we're all working in our different ways, and you have the skills and the skill sets to affect major change at a level we've been hoping to and toward. You have to understand, I own and operate Berkeley Patients Group. We're considered one of the oldest dispensaries in the United States. And we were contacted by healthcare workers and even by pulmonary surgeons, because they had no outlet for information. We actually had to create a syllabus and actually held classes in our dispensary just to educate them, because of the lack of knowledge and information. And of course, they didn't get accreditation or any credits for that ongoing education, which is something that is needed. And that's where you come in and what you're doing, and the effect is integral, which is why we see what you're doing and your mission is so important to us, because we deal with new doctors every 3 years in the VA, right? 80% of doctors go through the VA system. So we see them and we may never see them again. But at the same time, we also know how much we have to educate them, and the education that needs to continue forward, as we've been doing in the VA. It got me kicked out of 4 different VA facilities just talking about it. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
I was considered a known drug user, security called, and I was removed just for talking about it with my physician in the 90s. So I take great pride in what you are doing and attempting to do, as well as what Al and Mary Lynn created via Patients Out of Time, because of the need for the education beyond the reality that we exist upon. There has to be so many levels of reality educated, that yours is a flag we want to fly and fly high. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, we thank you because we need passionate people who care to insert themselves in areas to be at that table. Because as you know, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And
Yep.
so I'm glad you're there. All right. So we'll
For
go
sure.
back to our council members and our questions. And the next one will be Council Member Wade Laughter. Council Member Laughter.
I love that.
Yes. First off, Rachel, I wanted to thank you for your response to our first question, because your willingness to talk about the emotional aspect of your journey with cannabis, I think every other person on this call can really relate to your story and your experience of it. So thank you for setting that tone, if you will, for our conversation this afternoon. My question to you is, being an educator for holistic nursing practices, including cannabis care and ethnogens, how do you see, can you get specific, maybe would be a better phrasing, to some of the physical and mental well-being aspects for veterans and their families through the use of cannabis and ethnogens? Thank you.
Yeah, so really good question. This is what I truly love to do. So is teaching nurses, not only nurses, but patients as well, that, I said, cannabis may not always be the long-term answer. Holistic nursing is about helping the patient achieve wellness, mind, body, spirit, or if you want to say soul. But it's really, because it's, rare that standardized care applies to every patient. It just doesn't, right? So while safety is incredibly important, we must not overshadow what patients are telling us that helps. And I think really getting to this position where we're accepting their truth, right, as our own, and treating, them as such, or supporting them as such, I think is where healthcare needs to be. And I think we became so concerned with providing quick fixes, right, that most patients are now accustomed to just taking a pill and getting back to work. But health, it just doesn't work that way. And I think that's what holistic nursing is about. It's about finding what really brings them comfort, even if it's not what you have experience with. Learn it, right? So figure it out and understand, where they're coming from, why this works for them, why other things haven't. I think it's teaching a person to really listen and accept what their body's telling them. I think, it takes time and effort. And unfortunately, most of our society is just too distracted to listen to their mind, body, or, soul, spirit, is trying to tell them. And, entheogens in particular have been incredibly helpful when approached respectfully and with intention. And it makes me interested, as I feel it's a conduit to reconnect with source energy. And source energy could be anything to you. It could be nature, God, it could be animals, nature, or said nature, but other people, with yourself. I think as a guiding principle, we start to release these tensions and worries that we have sort of compacted within ourselves. And I know if this sounds a little woo-woo, that's okay. That's okay with me, because I accept that perspective, because at one point I did share those same thoughts, that it wasn't true medicine. And I think that the truly effective practices of entheogens is not about the psychedelic experience per se. It serves as like a catapult of sorts to push people into this intention of, but it has to be in an environment that is safe emotionally and physically. I think only trained, clinicians or experienced facilitators can really pull that off. I think for one to go into experience, with intention, they'll continue to do that work long after that one experience. And those can be life-changing, right? So I would really approach that with caution, especially with veterans that have this deep-seated trauma. War trauma is really hard to navigate. This simply is. And I think my advice to that is, if it doesn't call to you, then it's maybe not, it's not for you. And don't feel like you have to try those things to feel better. Cannabis also helps, right? That's a very spiritual medicine for many people, for very long before, I've been around. So I think just showing that respect for that, those experiences and that embodied wellness is just so important. So we try to teach that.
Absolutely. Set and setting are key, as we know. Yeah, you pretty much hit the nail square on the head there on accessibility, people's willingness, and also that it just doesn't work. People think that they're going to fit that square peg into that round hole, and that's where damage can happen. That's where, as you know, if you don't have a very educated practitioner, damage can be deep-seated as well as unavoidable.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. We'll go on to our next question, which is Council Member Nate Landau. Council Member.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for being with us. My question is, can you share your journey and motivation for transitioning from a hospital setting to becoming a holistic nurse interested in indigenous and cannabis care? How has this shift influenced your approach to supporting veterans and their family? Thank you.
Well, that transition did not happen easily. I worked downtown Detroit for a little over a decade before I made the transition. I loved working in that unit. I worked with spinal cord injury patients. I became certified as a rehabilitation nurse. I truly felt that was where I was meant to be. We went through a few mergers, and what the last one was particularly difficult, as I tried to stick it out for another 5 years, but it became a situation where I was I no longer felt like a nurse. I had very little time to educate patients about living independently, how to cath themselves, how to do bowel training. I mean, how to make sure that their wounds are cared for. It was really difficult because a lot of them were young men and just hadn't had time to process, right? So they were getting shoved to our unit way before we could really even talk about educating them, or even them being receptive to what we had with these tools that we could show them to help them on their healing journey that would help comfort them. So there's a lot to unpack there when you are paralyzed in an instant, right? So you go to the ER and you're in the ICU, and then you sort of as soon as your vitals are mostly stable, they would come to us, and we used to have months to spend with them. If we wanted, we could keep them longer because some patients needed more time, right? Some patients didn't have those resources to fall back on, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right to me. I just had very little time with them, and it was ultimately sending them on their way unprepared, and they would just turn back up in the ER, and pretty much the nurses were to blame. And it took a lot for me to walk away from that. But it really did begin to affect my relationships, with my family, with myself, my health. I was diagnosed with lupus around that time. It went against my, my morals and my ethics. And I finally decided to no longer support a system that was wrong to me. So like I said, I went back to school to learn how those systems, how you can change them. And looking back now, as far as making that shift, I would do it 100 times over. I think I took those chances and stepped into, the unknown because I felt passionate about something. And I think that we need to reignite that in nurses. We need to be innovative in how we're, helping them provide care. If and when we talk about veterans, I mean, that's an incredibly special population to work with. Some have been hardened by their experiences because many are not given the tools or time, right, to process and heal from things that they've endured. And like I said, trauma with, war is just not an easy fix. And if you've ever read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, I will tell you, it really opened my eyes to how deep-seated trauma can really cause these physical ailments in those neural pathways with anxiety and depression and nightmares. And what are those symptoms of, right? That's PTSD in a nutshell. And people have to reach for something to quiet those down, to survive. And it really does put people in this loop. And as healthcare providers, we are there to help slow that cycle and eventually allow them to step out. But we also have to be incredibly aware that people are vulnerable and raw when they step out of that. And if we don't interact accordingly, it's just so easy for people to jump right back into that cycle. And our healthcare model is simply not set up to allow physicians and nurses that time, which is why I could no longer support that system that was moving further and further away from human care. And unfortunately, the patients are ultimately the ones that suffer. And I do want to say, however, it's not holism or traditional care, one or the other. It's when we integrate these processes in a special way that is appropriate to those patients, and integrating science and caring is so incredibly important. I think that nurses are leaving the bedside in droves, which is unnerving. They're moving further and further, away because they're no longer doing what they went into nursing for. I know when my sister were 12 years apart, she decided and I'm the older one, she decided she wanted to go into nursing, and I didn't want to jade her from that. And it took a lot for me, but I did. I had to say, I just got to tell you this one thing. Nursing is not what you think. No, it's sad, but and that's all I told her. I said, I just have to tell you this one thing, because I think if you experience these things and then you say, why didn't you tell me, but I also wanted her to have her own experience, because her experience may not be like mine. And maybe she does, heal everybody and everything's rainbows and butterflies. I hope that for anybody. And I wouldn't want to jeopardize that sort of experience, because if a nurse has a really good experience, let's just, champion that, because we do need people there. And I mean, and if you come across a cold healthcare professional, you might want to think, why did they go into this? I don't even know why they're a nurse. Well, maybe they're working really hard and they're going against their integrity and their moral code every single day, but are showing up because who else is going to do it? So sometimes I do sympathize with professionals that have sort of lost sight of that, not lost sight, but have been really hardened off by the system. And it's just really unfortunate, because again, it's the patients that suffer. I think, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's a reality. My sister was a nurse, and so similar reality has crept in for her, to where she'd rather be a private nurse and actually be within a system. And that's a shame, because everybody I know who's gone to nursing, they actually care. And to see that light extinguished, one has to be you had to have seen it happen around you while you were experiencing it. But then when you find yourself experiencing it, a new pain, but somewhere within that, you found the resolve to go dive off a cliff and be brave and take that chance to educate those in a roundabout way that you were not educated. You did, formally, that is.
Right.
All right. So with that, we're going to go to our next question, which will be Alex Alex Popoff, Councilmember Popoff.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing everything with us, and especially for all the work that you've done. I was born up in Michigan, actually, so I'm glad to hear all the good work going on up there in patient access. So the question that we have is, as a researcher and investigator of a national nursing student study for cannabis care, could you provide some insights into the goals and potential implications of this research? And the second part is, how do you envision this impacting the accessibility and quality of cannabis care for veterans? Thank you.
Mhm. Well, yeah, that's a good question. So I've quickly realized that research is not just picking up a study and conducting research. It really does have to build upon past research, right? So what Dr. Carrie Clark and I did was, there was so the National Council of State Boards of Nursing are the people that sort of hold our NCLEX, our board exams as nurses. They came out with this journal supplement that pretty much said, this is what nurses need to know. And they spoke of pre-licensure. So that's, before you have a license. So that, is probably the associate nurses, APRNs, people that are working with medical cannabis patients on a regular basis. They came out with these 6 essentials that nurses needed to know. And one of those, essentials at the end was to provide care without judgment, right? That's just an ethical principle of nursing. And that came out, and we were coming to find that nobody even knew about it. It was published. It took a great amount of research from a regulatory body or third party sort of entity that has a huge impact on nursing regulation, and it's sat on a shelf, and we were like, well, how come nobody knows? So, in, I think it was 2019, Dr. Carrie Clark and I, she's a wonderful mentor of mine and now a best friend of mine, we went on this journey together to see what nurses were learning about it. Because before you can provide education, you need to know what they know and if they would even accept that education. So we did a national nursing study and representation from every state. And there was 1,346, I'll always remember, the nurses that completed the study. And we found that nurses were incredibly open to this education, desired it, wanted it, and had really great experiences at the bedside, with patients. I mean, our nurse, even though they were nursing students, it included nursing students from every range up to, PhD. So that was our sort of, okay, you're on the right path, right? So once we figured all that out, okay, so first of all, it's justified, the National Council of State Boards of Nursing are saying nurses need to know this to provide care for patients that are using this. And now we know nurses aren't getting it in curriculum. So that shows us that we need to somehow get this in curriculum. Right now, it's mostly, education programs, which serve the purpose, absolutely. But I think medical cannabis is so broad now that nurses may not take the time to get that extra education. So they do need to know that what the endocannabinoid system is, just simply that. In, physiology and anatomy and physiology, I think really looking at the science of it, and that we do have an endocannabinoid system that sort of quiets a lot of these overstimulations in our nerves and neurons. I think that once people realize that there's a system that is affected through cannabinoids, endocannabinoids, we make our own cannabinoids, right? And sometimes, through diet and just lifestyle, those can be dampened just like any other system. Serotonin can be lowered. Well, your endocannabinoid system can be lowered. So if you're supplementing that on your path to creating this this wellness for yourself, then nurses need to know that it exists, and so do physicians. So that was the basics of that study, is to really get the word out there. And we published it in the Journal of Nursing Regulation, which was like, for my first research, I was like floored that I was able to get that published by the Journal of Nursing Regulation, which is, they write about regulating everything. And our experiences with regulation in cannabis has probably, been a little bit hard to deal with. But I was just happy that happened. So that set me on another sort of mission. I guess it was the same mission, but instead of educating individual patients or individual nurses, I set out to, teach the teacher. And okay, needs to get in a bigger audience. Like, we need to get this out to more nurses so then they can share this information to patients and other nurses and other clinicians. I think that type of research, when you're really doing it by the book, does provide some credibility to what we're doing here. And I think that's it was a foundation to start putting these cannabis concepts into nursing curricula. And I truly feel if we can mobilize over 4 million voted the most trusted profession, nurses, into changing the way the laws and the systems affect health, we have an incredible chance to improve access and quality products, or for the veteran population. It's that simple. It's that simple. If we can teach our nurses, there's so many of us, more than any other healthcare profession, category. I mean, could you imagine? Like, we really could do some great changes, and I see the value in that. And as Marilyn Mather would say, it just makes sense, right? It just makes sense for nurses to understand this, because we're with patients. We understand all the aspects that go into care, not just the medicine component, but the family support, employment issues. There's a lot that goes in. I mean, even immigration, there's a lot of things, federal housing, that would be impacted. And patients need support in navigating that and knowing their rights, and understanding how this could affect them negatively at the moment, and being prepared to do something about it. And we're seeing that nurses are accepting, and I think that is true for, as we continue this conversation, and people realize it's not so scary. It's, I mean, you look at opioids, right? And then it's just, it breaks your heart to think that we can simply push all these opioids and people are dying, literally dying from this, and really going through it. And when cannabis should probably be the first line of treatment. And to say there's, no research, I get that the clinical trials are important for people to feel safe, recommending it. But it's as simple as knowing what's in it, teaching patients how to, do it safely, create it and grow it safely. I just think that if we can get nurses all together and moving towards this, I go to Washington, D.C. next week to talk with the American Nurses Association. We're hoping to get some sort of relationship there, that we can establish, cannabis nursing as a specialty practice for nurses. And then we can really show that there's something to it for nurses. They can even come into that as a profession and really drive that change. So that's my hope.
Well, it sounds like it's more than just a hope. These are your actions.
Yeah. And that's what it is too. Like, I can't even explain how I got to this point, other than showing up. I've showed up. Yeah, I kept showing up. I took chances. I thought, there were many nights I cried thinking, when I left my nursing job, I would cry, what am I doing? I have kids to support. Like, I didn't know how this would pan out. And I've just followed, my instinct with it. And it's been an incredible experience that, I would just never take away. And I just think that if we share it, then people will eventually help change those laws, right?
Yes. Council member Al Byrne, you're recognized. He has a follow-up question.
Rachel, I'm one of the old guys, you know, and I don't think you understand how grateful we are who you are. And Alex and other young people, veterans that have, if you will, picked up the baton or the torch. But no, we're grateful. And Wade's shaking his head. He's another old guy. See all the gray hair there? We believe. Listen, I just want the nurses that might be in attendance in this audience to understand, I'm sure you remember, that the American Nurses Association, the big deal place, man, these are the bosses, right? Twice have said in writing that every U.S. nurse in this country carrying that credential should know everything they can about therapeutic cannabis. Twice. I'm not a nurse. You are. But I think that was a incredibly great enunciation of the importance of cannabis as a therapeutic plant. So I hope when you and the ACNA meet in the future, you support the ANA in their educational effort. I think that that's a good thing. And then the let's get together thing. Good luck. That's sort of something you can talk to me in private about. But again, thanks for being here. I really like what you're saying. You take care out there.
Thank you so much. You too.
All right, our next question will go from Council Member Michael Krawitz. Council member.
Thank you, Ken. So I think this question can kind of be summarized as the looking for your elevator pitches. You know, what would you be able to give as a author and a contributor to a cannabis related nursing textbook? You know, what would be your quick rundown, your main concepts or topics that you give policymakers, healthcare providers, veterans that really should be aware of these things? You know, what about cannabis as an alternative treatment? What is the top flagged thing? And then the flip side of that, how can the education that you've been working on, how can we best take advantage of it? How can it be best applied to counter misconceptions, to dispel misinformation?
Yeah, so I think speaking and writing about cannabis in a way that supports the science and like the act of caring is just really needs to be front and center. I think having those difficult conversations, not being afraid to speak to regulators or hospital administration, because those that don't understand and continue to live by what they were taught or believe, we know that belief is a huge part of learning, and knowledge, if it's just defined as a true justified belief. I think if belief is something someone has to go on, it's their personal worldview, right? And if we challenge that, it can be difficult to accept. So yeah, it's nearly impossible to change somebody's worldview without the truth and this justification that we know we have. But sharing knowledge is sort of how we make the change, and that's the reason why I chose to put myself out there. I think regardless of how I was perceived, when we approach change with this understanding that people are a product of their experiences, we're more inclined to sort of hear them out and then provide information that is meaningful to them, not just our our general, like we said, like our elevator speech, right? So I think, of course, if you say, oh, you're wrong, that's a surefire way to not being heard. So I think one of the most important things is when you share information, no matter how angry it can make you feel, and in the injustices of it, and the silliness of some of the regulations, I think take your time and know your audience. I tell my students this all the time: know who you're talking to, make it apply to their mission and values, make it apply to their bottom line. However you have to do it, make it apply to their life, work. And I think for veterans or patients or whoever, I think the most important takeaway is knowing what's in your product. Take it slow. Understand that high THC is not always the goal. I think if we can work together with dispensary staff, I think dispensary staff are incredibly knowledgeable in cannabis, and some are in the disease process, but healthcare professionals really do understand that disease process and what should be considered when using different variations of cannabis. I think, just knowing that the first pass, how it metabolizes in different metabolites, and it doesn't always get to all the bodily systems before it does that, and the other methods that would help it get to those systems is good, pharmacokinetics, right? We should know that. We should apply it to cannabis, so we're doing the best, our optimal benefit that we can. I think the way to know, what's in your cannabis is really requesting a certificate of analysis if it's coming from a dispensary. I think that is really important. Having us work together. I think many dispensaries are really afraid of healthcare professionals because they think we want to take it over or we want to regulate it, and that's just simply not the case. We just have some really good information that we can share, and we know that they have really good information and experiences that they can share, and I think that would be a really incredible team working in this field, and we want to add value to that and have an influence on the types of products. We want to look at microdosing products because that has been really helpful for a lot of people. If I send, my grandma into the dispensary and she comes out with RSO, I mean, that's a problem. And that may cause an experience that she will never even touch it again, right? And when it could have been incredibly helpful for her had she knew a little bit more about how it would affect her. I think also understanding the bodily systems, if there's any impairment, and liver issues or kidney or, anything that would affect the way the cannabis works within somebody's body and through elimination is important to know. I don't think cannabis is so dangerous that it needs to be controlled by any means. I think it needs to be descheduled. It's a plant. I think, I just think that we should be there to help guide people. And if they want our help, some are just fine doing it without a healthcare professional, and that's perfectly fine. But I also think that teaching people how to grow cannabis, without pesticides or understanding what is absorbed into the plant, like heavy metals and things like that, is also important. And it's a message that we should all be sharing, and just to make sure that people are safe about it. And because if you don't know, you just don't know. I didn't know at one point, and I think that's it. It's just making sure you know what you're consuming, and that's really the bottom line.
Well, it's very important. That's why I started testing back in 07 and 08 is because
Wow.
I bought some cannabis from our dispensary and got an upper respiratory infection. So we realized through our organoleptic testing that we could see what we could see, but we were blind to something. And we knew that science would help us figure that out. And of course, now, 15 years later, it's now the standards and, you know, all that are happening. But back then we had to, like you know, kind of jump off that ledge and just kind of say, no, because the research triangle wasn't going to give us any, you know, of the standards. So we had to find other people around the world to actually give us the bumpers for the highway that we could go further down that we're currently cruising down. So thank you for being a pioneer in what you're doing, because it is very important work. And yeah, one we will keep our eye on for years to come.
Yeah.
But we're also blessed to have Mary Lynn Mathry here, who's one of our awesome council members. So Council Member Mathry, you're up for the final, well, no, for this question, then I got the final question. Go ahead, Mary Lynn.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thanks so much, Rachel, for coming.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening today, if you know a nurse, if you are a nurse, think about joining the American Cannabis Nurses Association. You've got credible people like Rachel at the helm. And as she noted earlier, you know, Canada's got 600,000 nurses. The US has over 4 million. We are a big number, so we can have a big voice. So as you mentioned just recently, this last talk, you said something about it's a plant. You're right. So can you discuss the benefits of growing your own cannabis and how nursing education supports patients' rights to do so?
Sure. I mean, I think a question would be to anyone, do you garden? Do you enjoy growing vegetables or flowers? Is it therapeutic for you? Do you like sharing the 1,000,000 tomatoes that you swear you'll dial back down next year for? I know every gardener has like a ton of extra, and it feels good, right? It feels good to share those things. It is therapeutic. And I think that's just one of the few things that, you know, holistic nursing is all about. And it's simply, you know, incredibly empowering to be able to grow your own medicine. I mean, to know its origin and the care that went into it, and not everybody can do that, but I do think that education will support that. I think if we can share safe practices, then we don't have to worry about so much about you know, the unintended consequences of pesticides and heavy metals. I think that if we can let people just live, right, and enjoy how they feel is most beneficial to them, we really do need to start allowing people, I guess, I don't know, to do that, and not imposing, you know, restrictions on that. As long as, you know, it's education. If we can teach about the safety aspects and openly discuss it with our providers, or, you know, grow other cultivators, or, you know, anybody, I think that it can really, I want to say change the world, but you know, it can really do some good. Get people out there moving and experiencing it. I think it's something to do.
Well, people revolve in their own world, so you're helping them save them in their own world. So
Yeah.
there's a correlation there. All right. Councilmember Byrne as a follow-up. Al?
No question, just a compliment, Rachel. There's a lot of old guys here that have been growing plants for a long time.
Yes.
And you can accuse us of all kinds of motivations, but the bottom line is it was friggin' great. Just watching it all happen. And so thank you for bringing that up.
You know, my father-in-law is a veteran from Vietnam, and he told me, I can't believe, I never would have thought I'd be able to just walk into a shop and purchase it, right? And he still is sort of beside himself, you know, because it's just been, you know, regulated or like prohibited for so long that it just felt like you were doing something wrong for so, you know, and then that's terrible to make people feel that way. And to be able to go into the store, I'm just so thankful that I got to see his reaction to that. I think it's special. And I'm so happy that we're in this transition. Yeah. Yeah.
That's freedom. You see, when we were in Vietnam, we could walk into any shop
Yeah.
and we could buy a joint pre-rolled, we could buy 10 of them, we could buy a case. And that was freedom in Vietnam. And so I'm glad it's come to America.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. 30 years ago when I was an activist, there was like, it's never going to happen in your lifetime, kid.
Right.
It didn't stop us, but here we are, because we used to daydream while we were going around the country. Can you imagine going into a store? But wait, there's not one kind of weed. You'll have all the different kinds. All the different, yeah. So we dreamed it, and it can be achieved, the same as you're dreaming of educating these ignorant fools about what they don't know, and flipping the switch internally, which is major change. So again, massive respect.
Thank you.
I can't thank you for joining us enough today. And our final question is, this is your chance to plug away as well. What are some of your goals going forward? We know it's got you to here, and it's a quite impressive story, but we know this isn't the end of your journey. You have your vision, where you want to go, where you want to take things, the utopia that, Rachel envisioned. So, what are some of your goals moving forward?
Well, I'm in a really good stage of transition in multiple areas in my career, in my education, in my goals. And, I created master's courses for a master's program, cannabis therapeutics master's program. And I'm looking to continue doing that, for schools that are willing to. I think if we can establish cannabis as a nursing specialty and be recognized by ANA, in the next few months, then, that is another, checklist on my list that I cannot believe I've already accomplished this early in my career with a lot of these things. I never thought, I told my husband, I said, this was years ago. I said, you know what? I'm going to teach nurses about cannabis. I'm going to go to school for it. I'm going to get a PhD. I'm going to be the president of the ACNA. And when we started laughing, you're so silly, and then all those things happen. I was like, I want to be a researcher. I want to, and those things happen quicker than I had imagined. So I'm in this stage right now where I need to take it further, and I'm waiting for that next thing to sort of come to me. And I'm working on my dissertation for my PhD in nursing education. So I'm excited about getting that done finally. And I just hope to contribute to nursing and research and education, and using these innovative sort of strategies to create knowledge, which is really what I enjoy. And the powers that be keep asking for more research, so I intend on providing it. So.
Steps by steps. Council Member Laughter has a follow-up or a comment.
Yeah, Rachel, that was a beautiful response to that question. And it sounds to me like you're one of those folks that has dreams and then realizes them, brings them to fruition. So keep on dreaming and creating the reality we'd all like to live in, where this is a plant and it's recognized in our medical system as a plant that every person, all veterans and their families, should have access to. So thank you for what you're doing. And yeah, I know some nurses. I'll ask them if they're part of the ACNA yet. Keep up the
we
good
welcome
work.
anyone. Any of nurses that are just even interested in it. We don't push our agenda on anybody, but we do share education, and naturally they sort of convert, right? So
can international nurses join, or is it strictly American at this time?
Yeah, we do have nurses from Israel, from Canada, and I believe, I think maybe Brazil. I don't know anymore if they're, but yeah, anybody can join. Any nurse, even supporter members can join too.
Well, we'll have to keep you looking over the horizon as the visionary that you are, but we'll also have to invite you. We work internationally, and we're working at the UN level, and we could use someone of your experience next March, potentially in Vienna. We had Dr. Dr. Adnoff joined us this past year, and needless to say, he was very helpful in dispelling a lot. Unfortunately, we're dealing with Kevin Sabet, and a lot of those lie machines are playing at that level. So we're out there diffusing their bombs consistently. So if you start to think, on the bigger stage, come back and check in with us. We would very much enjoy having and educating you and getting you up to speed, but you would also help bring world leaders to an educated level that they need as well. So careful what you ask for.
Right. Well, I'd say yes. So
well, thank you very much for joining us, everybody. We've been joined by Rachel Parmelee. She is head of the American Cannabis Nurses Association, and their allies and friends. And please come back, check back in with us regarding your progresses, what happens, especially with your meeting with the American Medical Association. We were just on Capitol Hill last month ourselves. Council members Landau and Krawitz were on the ground, as well as Michael Green, trying to educate them to get access for our veterans. So we may pull you in there sometime too.
sure. Well, I'll have experience. I'm going next week. So, and I have these little 10-minute snippets that I can talk to everybody. So.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank our council members, Al Byrne, Alex Popoff, Wade Laughter, Nate Landau, Michael Krawitz, Michael Green, Mary Lynn Mathry, and myself, Etienne Fontaine. Thank you very much for joining us for our V.A.C. Roundtable number 55. Rachel Parmelee, and we look forward to when it's Dr. Parmelee. Thank you, everybody.